Are you kidding me? You're letting a civilian touch the gauntlet? The voice cut through the crisp Virginia morning air like a rifle shot. The Crucible training complex at Quantico stirred with murmurs of disbelief. Boots scuffing on gravel as Marines turned toward the approaching figure. Dr. Brynn Carter, a civilian researcher whose presence was already stirring more tension than anyone had expected. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to Courage and Honor, Veterans TV, so you never miss these fascinating tales of courage. And let us know in the comments where you're watching today. Gunnery Sergeant Daniel Lowell stood near the obstacle field, his square jaw tight, his posture impeccable. He had spent half his life on this base, first as a recruit, then as an instructor. The Crucible was his second home, every rope, every plank, every grain of dust beneath his boots carrying stories of sweat and perseverance. That morning, mist still clung to the trees at the edge of the field, and sunlight spilled over the 40-foot cargo net that towered like a quiet monument to marine endurance. No one could have guessed that before the next sunset. This wall would witness something no Marine had ever achieved, something that would challenge the very foundation of tradition and pride at Quantico. Lowell's eyes tracked a young recruit, struggling across the parallel bars. Private Jasper Townsend trembled with fatigue, his arms shaking as he fought to hold himself up. "Move it, Townsend," Lowell barked, voice steady but cutting. "Your grandma would have cleared that by now." A few recruits snickered, tension breaking just enough for the private to push through. The gunny's voice had that effect, sharp enough to sting but rooted in an odd kind of encouragement. He'd been shaping warriors for 15 years. And these moments of grit and failure were where Marines were truly forged. Behind him, the wall loomed, its ropes roughened by generations of hands, its frame a relic that had survived every modernization proposal. The wall was more than an obstacle, it was legacy. And for 15 years, Daniel Lowell's record time climbing it had stood untouched. 58.2 seconds. From dirt to bell and back again. Staff Sergeant Nash Thornton emerged from the equipment shed, clipboard tucked neatly under his arm. "Townsend's improved," he said, his tone crisp, always measuring. 43 seconds off last week, Lowell grunted. "Still too slow. But he's got heart. That's something." "Heart doesn't win wars," Nash murmured. Lowell shot him a look, the kind that carried both reprimand and amusement. "No, but it keeps you alive long enough to learn how." Then Nash mentioned it. "Colonel Strickland says we've got a civilian researcher coming through today. Pentagon initiative, biomechanics or something." Lowell's jaw flexed. Perfect. Another academic with theories about fixing what isn't broken. He'd seen it before. Researchers with clipboards and cameras, ready to tell Marines how to be more efficient, as if endurance, courage, and sheer will could be quantified on a chart. To men like Lowell, those people lived in a world too clean, too safe to understand what their equations really meant. From across the field, Corporal Trent Bear Cassidy was demonstrating rope climbing to a group of recruits. The man was built like a mountain, his Montana drawl rolling through the air. "You're not fighting the rope," he told them. "You're working with it. Rope wants to help you if you let it." Lowell smiled faintly despite his irritation. Cassidy had a gift, translating complex body mechanics into something even the greenest Marine could grasp. Then Lance Corporal Bridget Halstead jogged up, short hair damp, breath steady. "Gunny," she called, "visitor just cleared the gate." "Eat 10 minutes. Great," Lowell muttered. "Let the babysitting begin." Moments later, Sergeant Major Russell Kavanaugh strolled down from the observation tower, a man whose every movement spoke of experience, his face carved by decades of command. "You planning to play nice this time, Gunny?" he asked, one brow raised. "I'm always nice," Lowell said. Russell chuckled. "Tell that to the last MIT researcher who left here limping after you made him climb the rope." "He volunteered," Lowell replied, a hint of pride sneaking into his grin. The sound of an engine approaching drew their attention. A dark sedan rolled through the gate, tires crunching on gravel, coming to a slow, cautious stop. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Dr. Brynn Carter. Auburn ponytail, slim athletic build, posture poised but not pretentious. She wore weathered running shoes and a performance jacket, the kind that spoke of function, not fashion. Captain Kelsey Drummond, the base's civilian liaison, bounded out from the admin building to greet her, all enthusiasm and bright smiles. Kelsey believed in collaboration, maybe a little too much. Lowell could already sense how this would go. They walked toward him. As they drew close, Kelsey's voice carried cheerfully through the brisk air. "Dr. Carter, this is Gunnery Sergeant Daniel Lowell. He oversees most of the physical training here at the Crucible." Brynn extended her hand without hesitation. "Thank you for accommodating me, Gunnery Sergeant. I know civilians aren't always a welcome addition to your schedule." Lowell took her hand. Firm grip, calloused palms. "Not your typical academic, Doctor," he said curtly. "Captain Drummond mentioned you're studying biomechanics and injury prevention. What exactly are you looking to observe?" "I'm particularly interested," Brynn said, adjusting the strap of her backpack, "in how elite Marines approach obstacles that balance strength and efficiency. I think small improvements in movement patterns could reduce injury and even improve time." Thornton raised a brow. Lowell just folded his arms. "We've been training Marines a long time, Doctor. Our methods work." "I'm not doubting that," Brynn replied evenly. "I'm hoping to understand what makes them so effective, and whether those same methods could help improve broader performance programs." Russell stepped in then, easing the tension like a seasoned diplomat. "Doctor, why don't we show you the course? You can see what we do firsthand." Brynn smiled. "I'd appreciate that, Sergeant Major." As they walked toward the sprawling gauntlet, the morning light turned the field to gold. Brynn's sharp eyes traced every structure, the ropes, the beams, the steep wall that dominated the far end. She moved with quiet confidence, taking notes as she went, her scientific mind analyzing every detail. Lowell noticed her gaze linger on the wall. "His wall, that one," she said softly. "Looks like a real challenge." "It is," Lowell replied. 40 feet. Vertical cargo net. Tests grip, strength, endurance, and willpower. Fastest recorded time's 58.2 seconds. Her eyes flicked toward him. "Yours?" He gave a single nod. "I see," Brynn murmured almost to herself. And for the first time that day, something shifted. A spark of curiosity, maybe admiration, but also something deeper. A quiet, unspoken challenge had just been born. The tension that hung in the air after that unspoken challenge was subtle, but real, like static before a storm. Dr. Brynn Carter's eyes stayed on the towering wall for a moment longer, as if memorizing every rope, every crosstie, every angle that defined its brutal geometry. Then she turned back to Lowell, her expression unreadable. "You said 58.2 seconds?" she asked, voice calm, analytical. Lowell gave a short nod, ground to bell, then down again. "Been the record since 2010. "That's impressive," she said sincerely. "Would you mind showing me how you teach your recruits to approach it?" Lowell studied her for a long beat. There was nothing mocking in her tone, just curiosity, genuine and focused. Still, something in him bristled at the idea of being studied like a specimen. He'd spent his life proving his worth through grit, not through graphs and data sheets. Before he could answer, Kelsey Drummond jumped in, ever the enthusiastic bridge builder. Maybe Dr. Carter could even try one of the simpler obstacles herself. "You mentioned you were an athlete, right?" Brynn smiled slightly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "A recreational climber, yes. I find physical immersion helps me understand biomechanics beyond the lab." Lowell's jaw tightened. "Captain, these obstacles aren't a weekend climbing wall. People get hurt out here." "I'm aware," Brynn said quietly. "I'm not here to play Marine, just to learn." Her composure gave him pause. He'd seen plenty of civilians talk tough only to crumble the moment real exertion began. But there was something about the way she stood, balanced, deliberate, centered, that hinted at more than theory. Sergeant Major Russell folded his arms, watching the exchange with mild amusement. "Gunny, maybe we let her try the balance beams. Nothing dangerous about walking in a straight line." Lowell hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Fine, but she signs a waiver, and I stop it the moment she looks shaky." Kelsey already had her phone out, sending messages to the admin office. "You'll have your paperwork in 10 minutes. 15 minutes later, under the pale autumn sun, Brynn stood at the starting line of the gauntlet's first obstacle. A few Marines had drifted over, curious to see the civilian researcher attempt even the simplest challenge. Lowell explained without flourish. "Start here. Each beam gets narrower and higher. Keep your center of gravity low."
"Eyes forward, not down." Brynn gave a short nod.
Her face was calm, her breathing measured. She stepped up onto the first beam, 6 inches wide, 3 feet off the ground around, and began to walk. The murmurs around them quieted. Her first few steps were careful, but not uncertain. Her movements were fluid, precise. Her arms hung loosely by her sides instead of flailing for balance like most first-timers. When she transitioned to the second beam, which was narrower and angled slightly, her pace didn't falter. Bear Cassidy, arms crossed, muttered under his breath. "Huh, she's got balance." Lowell said nothing, though his eyes narrowed. She wasn't just decent, she was practiced. The kind of practice that came from repetition. Brynn completed the entire run without a wobble and landed softly in the dirt, knees bent just right. "Well," Lowell said finally, his voice even, "guess that yoga stuff works." "Some," she said, smiling faintly. "But climbing helps more." "Climbing?" Nash asked, raising an eyebrow. "Cargo nets, ropes, trees? Whatever I can find that challenges my grip and core alignment," Brynn replied, brushing dust from her hands. "Biomechanics isn't just equations. It's about feeling how the body moves under stress." The Marines exchanged glances. There was something compelling about her. Part scientist, part athlete, wrapped in the calm confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything. "Next obstacle," Lowell said, unable to stop himself. This one was the parallel bars, a test of upper body strength and rhythm. He expected her to struggle. Most civilians did. But when Brynn grabbed the bars and began to swing forward, the chatter died completely. Her arms were strong, her technique efficient. Not fast, but clean, like someone who'd practiced enough to make every inch count. By the time she dropped down, breath steady, there was no laughter left, only attention. "Not bad," Lowell admitted. "You train like that often?" "Every morning," she said simply. Halstead leaned closer to him, voice low. "Gunny, those hands of hers, they're not soft," he'd already noticed. "Calluses, the kind you don't get from typing. Something was off." For a civilian academic, Dr. Brynn Carter moved like someone who had been preparing for something very specific. Lowell's instinct, that finely tuned radar for hidden motives, began to hum. "All right," he said, voice sharpening. "You've got coordination and balance. Let's see what happens when gravity joins the fight." He pointed to a long horizontal rope stretched between two platforms. "Rope traverse. Hands only. 20 feet. Brynn's gaze followed the line of the rope. For the first time there was a flicker. Not fear exactly, but a private calculation. Lowell saw it and felt a grim satisfaction. "You can back out any time, Doctor." She met his eyes. "I'll manage." She climbed the first platform, gripped the rope, and dropped her body weight below it. Immediately, Lowell's expression changed. Her grip wasn't standard Marine issue. Her thumbs wrapped fully around the rope, her body hanging loose, conserving energy instead of fighting gravity. It was a grip style that required specialized conditioning, something she couldn't have learned casually. Slowly, steadily, she moved across. Her breathing was rhythmic, deliberate. When she reached the other side and pulled herself up, she wasn't gasping, or only flushed. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Thornton, who'd been timing quietly, looked down at his stopwatch and let out a low whistle.
45 seconds flat, that's
impressive. Lowell's eyes stayed fixed on her. "You've been training more than recreationally, Doctor." Brynn met his gaze squarely. "I take my research seriously, Gunnery Sergeant." "You can't study performance without understanding it." It was an answer, but not the whole one. And Lowell knew it. He followed her eyes as they drifted again toward the wall. The massive cargo net swayed lightly in the wind, ropes creaking like a living thing. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, almost reverent. "May I try that one?" The words hit him like a slap. The Marines turned. Even Russell lifted his head, his weathered face registering the same disbelief everyone felt. Lowell blinked. "You're not serious." "I am," she said simply. And in that single calm declaration, something shifted in the air, an invisible line drawn between challenge and madness. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The crisp autumn air seemed to still itself, carrying only the distant rustle of leaves along the tree line and the faint hum of a passing helicopter. Then, with a low whistle, Bear broke the silence. "Doc, that wall's not for tourists." Brynn turned toward him, her expression steady. "I understand. But I'd like to experience it firsthand, even if I don't make it to the top." Lowell folded his arms. "This isn't just a climb, Doctor. It's 40 feet of pain wrapped in rope. Marines get hurt on that wall. People who train for years." She met his warning with quiet determination. Then I'll go as far as I can. You'll stop me if it becomes unsafe. Fair enough? Russell stepped forward, sensing the mounting tension. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Colonel Strickland's going to want clearance before a civilian climbs anything that high. We'll need medical approval, safety gear, liability waivers. I'll sign whatever's required, Brynn interrupted gently. I know I'm the outsider here, Sergeant Major. But understanding biomechanics isn't just about observation. Sometimes you have to feel what the data means. Her tone wasn't defiant. It was earnest, thoughtful, almost persuasive. Even so, Lowell's instincts screamed that this wasn't about science anymore. This was personal. He glanced at her hands again. The rope burn scars faint beneath the newer calluses, the knuckles slightly roughened by repetition. This wasn't academic curiosity. This was preparation. He exhaled slowly. All right. You want the wall? You get medical clearance first. You stop when I say stop, and you follow every safety instruction. One misstep and you're off that net before you can argue. Understood, Brynn said, eyes unwavering. Dr. Leonard Pritchard, the base medical officer, was summoned within minutes. He was a tall man in his 50s, composed and methodical, the kind who spoke softly but carried absolute authority when it came to health and safety. I'm told we've got a civilian volunteer, Pritchard said as he approached, eyeing Brynn with polite skepticism. Name? Dr. Brynn Carter. Occupation? Biomechanics researcher. Georgetown University. Pritchard raised an eyebrow, already jotting notes on his clipboard. And you're planning to climb the crucible wall? That's the idea. He studied her like a scientist examining an anomaly. You've been cleared for physical exertion recently? Yes, my resting heart rate averages 58. I train daily. Pritchard's eyes lifted at that. Daily? 6 days a week, she clarified. After a brief evaluation, checking pulse, blood pressure, grip endurance, he stepped back, nodding reluctantly. Medically, she's fine. Condition better than expected, actually, but I'll stay close. If I say you stop, doctor, you stop. No debates. Brynn inclined her head. Agreed. As Pritchard filled out the clearance paperwork, the crowd around the obstacle expanded. Marines from nearby units had drifted over, curiosity drawing them in like moths to a flame. The story was spreading. A civilian researcher was about to attempt the wall. Kelsey Drummond returned, phone in hand, eyes bright. Colonel Strickland's aware and gave provisional permission, as long as medical supervision is active and liabilities covered. We're good to go. Lowell sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. This is going to be a damn circus. Russell chuckled under his breath. Welcome to modern military PR, Gunny. Civilian collaboration looks good on paper. The wall loomed before them, its ropes shifting in the breeze like the muscles of some sleeping giant. The base sunlight hit it just right, turning its woven lines into gleaming gold against the morning blue. Brynn approached slowly, her fingers brushing the thick fibers. The texture was familiar. Her mind flickered, flashes of memory from late nights at the climbing gym in D.C., the rough weave of cargo nets she'd ordered custom-built, the sting of rope burns that had hardened into pride. 3 years of secret training, and it all came down to this. She wasn't here just for data. She was here because somewhere deep inside, she'd decided that breaking this record mattered more than publishing 100 papers. Lowell's voice broke into her thoughts. Remember, Doctor, this isn't a test. It's a demonstration. Nobody's timing you. Across from him, Nash Thornton was already clicking his stopwatch open. Brynn's lips twitched in the faintest smile. Understood. Spotters in position, Lowell called out. Bear and 2 other Marines stepped into place around the base, ready to react. Bridget Halstead stood just behind Pritchard, eyes narrowed, her focus as sharp as a drawn blade. Brynn inhaled once, deeply. The air was cool, heavy with pine and earth. She placed both hands on the rope, feeling the give of it, the same flexibility she'd studied obsessively. Her muscles remembered what her mind had practiced 1,000 times. Breathe steady. Move with the rhythm. Let the net work for you, not against you. Ready when you are, she said softly. Lowell hesitated, then gave the signal. Go. Brynn began to climb. Her first few motions were careful, establishing contact, testing the net's tension. But then, almost imperceptibly, her movement changed. Her body flowed into a rhythm, a subtle wave pattern through her arms, torso, and legs. Instead of wrestling against the net's sway, she moved with it. Each pull of her arms was matched by a push of her legs, creating a chain reaction that propelled her upward faster than anyone expected. A murmur rippled through the watching Marines. "What the hell is she doing?" Bear whispered. "Climbing smarter than anyone I've seen," Bridget murmured. By the 15-foot mark, Brynn's pace hadn't slowed. Her breathing was controlled, her posture efficient. Every motion served purpose. No wasted strength. At 25 feet, where most climbers began to fade, she looked almost serene. Her wave-like rhythm conserved energy, distributing load through her entire frame instead of burning out her arms. Nash glanced at his stopwatch, his brows knitting in disbelief. 35 feet. The top bell shimmered above her, sunlight glinting off its metal curve. "Come on," Lowell muttered, voice low, uncertain whether he wanted her to succeed or fail. Then, clang. The bell rang, sharp and clear, echoing across the crucible like a gunshot, but she didn't stop. In one seamless motion, Brynn transitioned to descent, not the careful, cautious descent of Marines who feared rope burn or misstep, but a controlled fall, using the net's rebound to guide her downward. Her hands released and regripped in rapid succession. Her legs bent, absorbed, pushed off. The net flexed with her, not against her. Seconds later, she struck the bottom bell. Silence. Only the sound of the rope swaying, and the faint rasp of her breathing. Dr. Pritchard stepped forward immediately, scanning her face, her hands. Vitals stable. No injuries. Nash looked down at the stopwatch as if afraid of what it might say. 56.8 seconds, he said finally. The words fell into the silence like a verdict. Lowell stared at him, then at her, then back at the wall. His record, 15 years unbroken, when it was gone. Brynn straightened, still breathing hard, her face flushed but calm. "Wasn't bad for research purposes, right?" Nobody laughed. Lowell's throat felt dry. His voice came out quiet, almost reverent. How did you do that?" Brynn met his eyes. "Biomechanics," she said softly. "And 3 years of studying you." For a full 10 seconds, nobody moved. The weight of what had just happened hung in the air like a thick fog. Marines, men and women who had seen the impossible, stood frozen, caught between disbelief and awe. The only sound was the faint hum of the stopwatch still ticking in Thornton's hand. Then Bear broke the silence with a low, incredulous chuckle. "You've got to be kidding me. She beat the gunny?" Thornton nodded once, still staring at the timer as if expecting it to change. 56.8. "No mistake." A ripple spread through the crowd, half disbelief, half exhilaration. Even Sergeant Major Russell, usually the picture of stoic composure, let out a quiet whistle. Lowell's stomach twisted. He felt an odd mixture of anger, admiration, and confusion burning through his chest. He'd watched that wall defeat hundreds, men twice her size, recruits built for strength, endurance, and speed. Yet she had moved with an economy of effort that bordered on art. He stepped closer, his boots crunching over the gravel, eyes fixed on her. 3 years of studying me?" he asked, voice low but edged. Brynn nodded, still catching her breath. "Your training videos. The Marine Archives. Every televised demonstration you gave at the Quantico Symposium in 2013, 2015, and 2018. You talked about mental rhythm, the importance of the kinetic chain. I listened." "You listened," Lowell repeated as if tasting the word. "I modeled your movement patterns," she continued, unflinching. "Frame by frame. I studied where energy was lost, where micro-adjustments could create efficiency. And then I trained until I could move like that, only smoother." Lowell's jaw tensed. "You turned my life's work into an experiment." Brynn's expression softened. "No, Gunnery Sergeant. I honored it. That landed differently than he expected." Russell stepped forward, sensing the tension rising again. "All right, folks. Let's remember this isn't a competition. Dr. Carter came here to learn, and I'd say she's proven she's serious." But Lowell barely heard him. His mind was spiraling, half in the present, half 15 years back when he first set that record. He remembered the ache in his shoulders, the burst of adrenaline, the feeling of being untouchable. He'd carried that record like armor. It wasn't just a number. It was identity. Now, in less than a minute, that armor had cracked. He looked at her again. She was standing with perfect composure, breathing steady, posture upright. Nothing of arrogance in her stance, only quiet confidence. "You planned this," he said finally. Brynn hesitated. "Not the reaction, if that's what you mean." "The timing," he pressed. "Coming here, climbing that wall. You knew what that record meant." Her gaze didn't waver. "Yes, because what it represents, the tradition, the endurance, the pride, deserves to evolve. You taught the world to climb with power. I wanted to show it could be done with precision." The word struck him harder than he expected. He didn't know whether to be furious or proud. Russell turned to the onlookers, raising his voice. "All right, everyone, back to your stations. Show's over." The crowd dispersed slowly, murmuring as they went. Some shook their heads, others smiled. The base would be buzzing by lunch. Lowell stayed where he was, watching Brynn pack her notebook, her movements methodical, almost ritualistic. When the last Marine drifted away, he said quietly, "You've just started a fire you can't control. Word will spread. Every recruit in the Corps will want to climb like you now." She met his eyes again. "Good. Maybe they'll stop seeing the wall as something to fight. Maybe they'll learn to work with it." Lowell's breath came slow, deliberate. He wasn't sure if it was frustration or respect twisting in his chest. He gestured toward the bench by the field's edge. "Sit." Brynn blinked, surprised, but complied. He followed, sitting beside her. For a moment, neither spoke. The morning sun had climbed higher, burning away the mist, leaving the field sharp and clear. "You know," Lowell said finally, "in the Corps, we don't like being studied. We live by instinct, by repetition. We don't think about torque angles or energy chains." "I know," she replied softly. "That's why I needed to understand what makes instinct so powerful. Science can learn from you as much as you can learn from science." He looked at her then, really looked. Past the polite professionalism, past the sharp intellect, there was something restless in her eyes, something that didn't belong to academia. "Why this?" he asked quietly. "Why the wall? You could have proven your theories anywhere." Her hand brushed a strand of hair from her face, her eyes drifting toward the horizon. "Because my brother never made it over." The word stopped him cold. She continued, voice barely above a whisper. "Sergeant Eli Carter, Marine, died during training 2019. He slipped halfway up the crucible wall. Rope failure." Lowell's chest tightened. He remembered the report. A freak accident, one that had shaken the base for months. He was 26, she said. "He used to talk about you, Gunnery Sergeant Lowell. Said you were the kind of Marine who made people believe they could be more than human." Silence. Brynn swallowed hard, her voice steady but trembling at its edges. "When he died, I promised myself I'd finish what he started. I thought if I could understand the body well enough, if I could make the climb he never finished, maybe I'd finally understand why he loved this place so much." Lowell didn't respond right away. He simply sat there, letting her words sink into the space between them. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer than it had been all morning. "Your brother. He was one of the good ones. Quiet, disciplined. Always asked why things worked instead of just doing them." Brynn's lips curved faintly. "That sounds like him." Lowell exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "If I'd known who you were when you arrived, maybe I would have treated you differently." "I'm glad you didn't," she said. "You taught me more in one morning than any research grant ever could." He gave a small, tired smile. "You realize the Colonel's going to want you to demonstrate that climb again. Officially this time." Brynn's eyes glinted with determination. "Then I'll be ready." They sat in silence for a while longer. Two figures framed by the gleaming ropes of the wall behind them, one representing the past, the other the future. The sound of boots crunching on gravel broke their quiet moment. Sergeant Major Russell approached, holding his radio in one hand. "Gunny," he said, "Colonel Strickland wants both of you in the briefing room. Now." Lowell groaned under his breath. "Here we go." Brynn rose beside him, her expression unreadable. "Guess the fire's already spreading." Russell gave a thin smile. "You have no idea." The briefing room at Quantico was built for precision. Sterile white walls, polished steel chairs, and a long oak table that smelled faintly of varnish and authority. Sunlight filtered in through the blinds, slicing the space into alternating bands of light and shadow. Every Marine who entered felt it. The gravity of the room, the way silence carried more weight than words. Colonel Richard Strickland sat at the head of the table, posture crisp, expression unreadable. A man in his late 50s with silver hair and eyes like cold glass, He had commanded respect long before he ever earned his title. His reputation was built on discipline, decisiveness, and a refusal to tolerate theatrics. Brynn and Lowell entered together, followed closely by Sergeant Major Russell and Captain Kelsey Drummond. The atmosphere was taut, a blend of professional restraint and unspoken curiosity. Strickland didn't waste time. "Dr. Carter," he began. His voice measured. "I've just received a dozen reports that you scaled the Crucible wall faster than any Marine in recorded history. Is that accurate?" Brynn met his gaze evenly. "Yes, sir." Time was 56.8 seconds. He glanced at Thornton's written confirmation on the desk, then back at her. "Under medical supervision with full safety compliance?" "Yes, sir," she said. Dr. Pritchard approved the activity and Marines were stationed for spotting. Strickland's expression remained calm, but his tone tightened. "Do you realize what kind of storm this will cause? That wall isn't just an obstacle. It's tradition, a rite of endurance that defines who we are. And now a civilian in one climb has shattered that image." "I didn't come here to challenge your tradition, Colonel," Brynn said softly. "I came to understand it, and to show that science and strength don't have to be at odds." Strickland studied her for a long, heavy moment. Then his eyes shifted to Lowell. "Gunnery Sergeant, what's your assessment?" Lowell's back straightened. His words came slow, deliberate. "Sir, I don't think this was about competition. The doctor's approach wasn't reckless. It was studied. She applied biomechanics to something we've always treated as pure grit. It worked." "That's precisely the problem," Strickland said, his tone firm but not angry. "If word spreads that muscle and willpower aren't the ultimate measures of a Marine, morale could suffer. The Corps runs on belief. Belief in our limits, belief in surpassing them. We can't afford to let formulas redefine what's sacred." Brynn held his gaze. "With respect, sir, what you call belief, I call evolution. Marines don't stop improving, they adapt. That's what makes them who they are." The colonel's eyes narrowed, assessing her. "You talk like someone who's worn the uniform." She hesitated. "My brother did." Something flickered across his face, recognition, maybe even regret. "Sergeant Eli Carter," he said quietly. "He was under my command during the training fatality." "Yes, sir," Brynn said, her voice barely audible. Strickland leaned back, exhaling. The room fell into silence again, the kind that stretched, tense and fragile. Finally, he said, "I remember that day. Good Marine. Strong heart," he paused. "You wanted to finish what he started," Brynn nodded. "Yes, sir." Strickland's tone softened slightly. "Well, Doctor, you've done that and more." He rose from his chair, walking slowly toward the window. "But understand this, the moment your climb gets out, it stops being research. It becomes symbolism. The media will call it groundbreaking, maybe even heroic. They'll say a civilian outperformed the Marines, and every recruit who fails that wall will remember your name," Brynn said quietly. "Then teach them why I succeeded." The colonel turned, surprise flickering behind his eyes. "Make it part of the curriculum," she continued. "Study the technique, the efficiency, the rhythm. It's not about replacing strength, it's about refining it. Marines will still climb, still sweat, still fight their own fear, but maybe fewer of them will fall." Her voice trembled just slightly on that last word. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Strickland's expression shifted, something like reluctant respect edging past his authority. He looked at Lowell. "What do you think, Gunny?" Lowell took a breath, weighing his words. "Sir, I think what she did was impossible, until she proved it wasn't. If Marines can learn from that, they should." Strickland gave a short nod, as if conceding a battle he hadn't expected to fight. "Fine, you'll collaborate on a report. Techniques, analysis, potential applications for training. We'll send it to the Pentagon's Human Performance Division. If they approve, we move forward." "Yes, sir," both of them said in unison. The colonel's eyes softened just enough to show something human. "For what it's worth, Dr. Carter, your brother would have been proud." Brynn's composure wavered for the first time that morning. "Thank you, sir." Strickland dismissed them with a nod, turning back toward the sunlight slicing across the blinds. Outside, the hallway buzzed with subdued excitement, whispers already spreading from room to room. Marines who had witnessed the climb stood straighter, half in disbelief, half in admiration. As they walked side by side toward the training field again, Lowell broke the silence. "You realize this base won't forget today?" "I hope not," she said softly. "Because neither will I." He looked at her then with something between pride and humility. You didn't just beat a record, Doctor. You changed the way Marines think. Brynn smiled faintly. Maybe it's time the wall stopped being something to conquer and started being something to understand. They stepped outside and the sunlight washed over them both. The wall loomed tall against the sky, no longer a symbol of limits but of possibilities. Lowell stopped, glancing up at it one last time. Funny thing, he said quietly. I spent 15 years trying to keep that record. Never thought I'd be glad to lose it. Brynn's eyes softened. Sometimes breaking something is the only way to honor what it stood for. He nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. As they walked away, a group of young recruits gathered at the base of the wall, pointing upward, studying the ropes. One of them, barely 20, all nerves and determination, said, If she can do it, maybe I can too. Lowell smiled at that. Looks like your work's already begun, Doctor. Brynn turned toward the obstacle, the sunlight catching her hair as the wind moved through the ropes. The wall no longer looked like a barrier. It looked like a promise and of courage, of evolution, of memory. She exhaled deeply, her voice barely a whisper. For you, Eli. The bell at the top swayed lightly in the wind, ringing once, soft, clear, and resolute. And somewhere in that sound, courage and honor found their balance once more.